See, the prophetic gives the greatest incentive for business people because the prophetic causes us to have intelligence for things that we grow in intelligence very quickly. I remember when I was doing civil rights conferences, I'm the least person to do civil rights. I've never had known racism. I think all white people have an undercurrent of racism we don't know about inside of us. And I'm serious about that because I've now been in many of the main spiritual and Christian conferences that deal with civil rights movements in America. And I think that most people, including myself, have an undercurrent of racism, even though mine hasn't prevented me from having true friendships with different communities. My best friend is Guatemalan. I don't say just like some of my best friends are black. I'm not saying that, but some of my best friends really are black. So that's why I'm saying that. But even with that, there's things that I've done where I've learned about racism through the years just by being around it. So I've learned from being in the only white person in an all-black community at times what I don't have intelligence in. And I've said, God, you have to create in me an understanding because I grew up on the Jeffersons and Cosby show, and so I have positivity about their situation that's not even real. So there's something inside of me that believes something that's not even real because that was just TV. That's not their real struggle. And so I had to be indoctrinated. I remember I used to hate Jesse Jackson's politics, and so I kind of hated him. And then I met him. And I'm like, he's actually one of the most brilliant thinkers who really loves Christ. And yes, he has had all of the mistakes you've heard probably. But at the same time, there's a reason why he's in the position he's in that's not just politics. There's a genuine God calling and authority on his life that got him to where he's at. I'm not saying he's used it all correctly or whatever. But when I met him, I thought I was going to hate him. And I'm actually going, oh, you are absolutely one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. Not just mental, intellectual, but spiritually brilliant over issues in America that I've never thought through. And I remember when Obama was getting elected, Elizabeth Almalunga, who's Martin Luther King's niece, called me up and said, Shawn, Obama got elected. Isn't this amazing? I'm at this, because I was supposed to be at this convention, but I went to a leadership conference instead, and not realizing what a big deal it was for the community I was connecting to. Most of the civil rights leaders were there, Rosa Parks' grandkids and kids, and a lot of Martin Luther King's family, and Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, and lots of athletes and stuff. And they were all in this convention together the night that Obama got elected, celebrating because God was finally going to heal the racial wound. He put politics and business on hold and was going to heal a racial wound in America, where he's finally raising up a man who's a good father and a good husband who probably won't leave those roles in his lifetime. And so now the African-American community and other minority communities have an example, and no excuses. This is what they called the No Excuse campaign with Obama, that they challenge each other in these civil rights conferences. They challenge the young men of the nation. You have no excuses. You don't have to go to jail. You don't have to consider yourself second class anymore, because the most powerful man in the world is African-American. I'm in a white conference. Why they're telling me this, it's mostly white people, maybe one token Spanish person and a token Asian person. And I'm there, and they're crying because they feel like it's the end of the world, and the Antichrist has been elected, and abomination has started. And I'm looking at them going, she's literally prophesying to me, the racial wound's going to be healed. You don't even have to believe that. It's not your story, it's my story. I believe that story. I believe that God put something on hold for 8 years so that he can move something forward in social justice that has not hit our nation since the 60s. And Martin Luther King had a dream, and he was a spiritual forefather in our nation, and the generation is called to now live the dream. And so God put something on hold in our politics that we care about so much to do something that we don't think about as white people. So we're offended, And I'm not saying he's been a good president or even a great president. I'm just saying that there's something that God appoints leaders. And I remember being in this white conference, and everyone's crying. Some of my spiritual heroes were devastated. And I'm and they were literally saying things like, now the nation's going to go to crap. And I'm like, I don't know if you know this. I met with the president of Venezuela, and that nation's going to crap. I was prophesying to him, praying for him, going, I hate this man, God. Why am I meeting with him? Lord, turn my love on, because this man does not deserve my love. He's like a dictator, and not a benevolent dictator. He's a totally crazy man. I met with some North Korean leaders. I can't talk about it because we're working in North Korea right now, but you can assume what I would say. I met with people in my lifetime in nations. I met with one of the owners of a whole nation. He owns 2/3 of the property in the nation illegally, who's a Muslim guy, and he wanted to meet with me because he heard I was a prophet. So he wanted to meet with me, and I met with him. It was one of the most miserable experiences of my life. And that country was oppressed because that man was in place. And then I come back to America, where I kiss the ground every time I come back. And I'm like, I don't care who's in place. Hillary could be the president for all I care. It's still going to be way better than any other country in the entire earth because of us. Not because of our president, but because people have the rights to vote and change things. So we get 1 or 2 or 10 or 15 oppressive laws, but we have thousands of freedom laws. I mean, I thank God for the police when they pull me over, because I'm like going, go to another country where they literally try and steal your ID so you will pay them for it back. You know, go to another immigration. We get mad at TSA. Go somewhere else. I was in Northern Ireland, and they took everything, even the lint, out of my backpack, made me miss 2 flights. Stripped me down to my underwear because they thought I could be a terrorist. And I'm just like, wow, we're so afraid of one man who might have good values in one sense, but not the same shared values in another sense, and we think he can destroy America. No, will not fall that fast, because just like the analogy I used earlier, and I use this because we have to start getting intelligence, because we have to love the world we're connected to, even when the administration is not something we trust. We still have to see what God's doing through it. And if we don't, we have an Antichrist spirit. Because Christians see what God's doing, they don't just see what God's not doing. Okay? So if you haven't seen what God's doing through Obama's administration, you have an Antichrist spirit to our government. Because even Fidel Castro, when he was in place, the Cubans that I met with all the Cuban churches at once, all of them, the underground ones and the known ones. We came together, and they told me why God put Fidel Castro in place. They had a reason and an understanding and a spiritual intelligence, and they had gratitude for it, even though they didn't like Fidel Castro. So if they can do that to a dictator who caused oppression, we can do it for a man who's just trying to be a good man and have a good heart. And here's reality, is that you will not have authority over what you don't love. The reason why Christians don't have authority in this administration is because we hate it. We hate the people involved with it. We don't like it. And so the majority voice of Christians cannot be heard right now over politics, because we have a spirit of hatred, an Antichrist spirit inside of our mouths. And I'm telling you, you get in the entertainment industry, it's worse. There's people who are not as good as Obama in the entertainment industry. There's people who are at the top of some of the companies, and there's incredible people at some of the top of the film industry, and there's demons at the top of the film industry. There's both. You know, depending on what studio, depending on who's in place at which time. You know, you'll hear the reports about Disney because a few people are oppressed by something, some sexual orientation at Disney, but then there's incredible Christians that are involved in Disney. So you can't even judge it by one branch of a company. There's things that are happening, and if we don't stand with what God's doing, we will always be in opposition to something. But we're called not to protest, we're called to manifest. We're called to manifest the kingdom the world's hungry for. And so, again, just like I talked about earlier, if you have an immature teenager going through identity issues, it causes compassion, right? So if someone's 14 years old, they've come from an abused lifestyle, and they say, I need help, you actually might stop and help them. But if it's a 40-year-old, man or woman who's going, will you be my daddy? And you're like 30, you might go, you need a lot more help than I could ever bring. You need probably rehab and therapy and whatever. It's the same with America. We're treating America like it's a 40-year-old prostitute when it's actually a 14-year-old promiscuous girl. And a 14-year-old promiscuous girl, you don't kick out of your house because they're promiscuous. You set boundaries up. The Lord's not about to expel us from his plan that he gave the forefathers and has prophesied of our nation because we've been rebellious in certain branches. He's still going to fulfill his promise, because even when we're faithless, he's faithful because he can't deny himself, and he planned this country. And I'm not a nationalistic person. I think at some point America might not be here. I don't know. I'm not like, forever America until the millennial kingdom or whatever. I'm just like, I know there's plans and purposes on our nation that have not been fulfilled, so why are we condemning what God's building? And if we don't have that kind of intelligence, scriptural intelligence, we won't bring transformation, and we won't have the right incentives, because your business, even you realize our country is only as strong as our small business owners. And so whatever you're working on, if you're not successful, you're part of the problem of why our country is failing. Because you're Christians, and you're the only ones who have a strategy from heaven. Other people might access a strategy from heaven, but you're plugged into it. You're online with it all the time. You can be present with the strategy of heaven all the time. Whereas other people, God is good. He lets the strategy of heaven hit people and hit places because there's certain things he wants to move forward despite humanity, and he loves humanity enough to bring it anyways. Just like Jesus came in the most ungodly time. It was a weird time to come. He comes in the most weird places, in the most ungodly times. But the difference is we are Christians who always have him. God abides in you.